Hey guys, welcome back to Bear Mountain Builds, and today I'm going to show you how to build this beautiful dining room table using only construction lumber. Alright, so we've all seen the videos of these beautiful dining room tables made out of black walnut, mahogany, oak, and they look amazing. I love them just as much as you guys do, but they're also about $1,000 or more in just the lumber alone, and that can be out of reach for a lot of people. But today, I want to show you that you can build a beautiful table just like this using nothing but inexpensive construction lumber. Now let's get started. Anytime I'm using construction lumber to build, I always start off with running my boards through the planer to clean up my surfaces and then run it through my table saw to crisp up my edges. I'm cutting the boards to length to make it easier to run through the table saw. As usual, you'll find all the dimensions for this build in my free plans linked down below in the description. All I ask is that you please subscribe. You might have noticed the clamp on my rip fence. After 25 years, it finally broke. It has served me well, but it's time to move on to something a little bit bigger and better. Alright, so I've got my entire tabletop laid out. This is what it's going to look like. So now what I'm going to do is pull this all off, get my pipe clamps set up here, lay them back on there, and get everything glued together. Now, let's keep going. When building a tabletop like this, you need clamps that are heavy duty and straight. I always go with pipe clamps because they stay straight even when really torqued on, and the pipe can be threaded and cut to any length at the store so they can be as long as you need. If you're interested, I have them linked down below in the description. These boards have been sitting in the shop for about 2 months and remain totally straight, which means I don't have to use any cauls to keep them all flat to each other. I'm liberally applying each edge with glue, and I was going a little slow, so I broke out some more clamps and a log to help hold one half in place while I glued the other. The far side lifted up slightly during the clamping process. Luckily, there's a surefire way to fix this. More clamps! Once I had the top fully held flat, I used a damp cloth to clean up the glue squeeze. After 24 hours, the top came out perfectly flat and I moved on to smoothing the surface. There are 3 ways to smooth out a tabletop like this. 1, you happen to know a guy with a huge drum sander. 2, you build a router sled and go over every inch. Or 3, you use hand tools such as hand planers and belt sanders, which is what I'm going to do because I really enjoy the feel of a hand-finished tabletop. I started with a chisel to remove some glue squeeze and then moved on to the hand planer and finally went to a belt sander. This process takes some time, but it's well worth the effort. I like starting with a hand planer because it's much faster than sanding, but you have to be very careful because it can easily take off too much material and gouge the top. That's why I have mine set to only take a 1/64 of an inch off every pass. A helpful tip is to use a pencil to mark the locations where the top is uneven. It both helps you remember where you need to remove material, and once the pencil marks are sanded off, lets you know that it's smoothed out. With the tabletop roughly smoothed out, I'm moving on to the legs. As usual, I'm starting by running 2x4s through the planer to clean up the surface, then cutting them to length, and finally running each through my new table saw to square off the edges. With the leg pieces looking fresh, I'm adding some pocket holes to help reinforce the corners, but once the table is fully assembled, they will be completely hidden. Alright, so I got all my legs planed down and cut to length, so now it's time for assembly. So my legs are just going to be big squares that are going to be double thick of these 2x4s, and they're going to be double lap joints at every corner because they are super rock solid and really square. Double secret square. Alright, let's keep going. I'm using the other leg pieces as spacers. When gluing all the leg parts together, make sure the long pieces are on the outside of the shorter pieces to cover the end grain. These double lap joints are great because they are really strong and they ensure that the joint is square. I positioned the pocket holes so that there are 8 on the 2 boards at the top of the legs that will be up against the table, and 4 on the bottom board that touches the ground, and none of these will be visible. Alright, so I got the tabletop sitting on top of the legs right now just to kind of evaluate where the design is at and if there's any changes I want to make. So my original plan was to cut this 80-inch long tabletop down to 6 feet, which I'm kind of looking at it now. I'm going, these dimensions are looking pretty good. I like this thing right now. So I'm probably just going to end up cutting a little bit off on either end just to square it up and just kind of leave it at this length. Then I'm also doing is figuring out where I want to put my legs and my brackets. So I have 3 chairs on the other side. So if I had 3 people sitting there, they'd be straddling the legs on either side. Or if I had 2 chairs, they'd be sitting in between the 2 legs. So a good thing to do when you're building your own table. But now it's looking good. So we're going to go on, square off this cut, and then we're going to add some brackets. So let's keep going. I'm adding C-channel supports to both help brace the top and prevent any bowing. I have these linked down in the description, but they do come unpainted, so I use some steel wool to remove the surface rust and spray painted them black. Now that I know the placement of the legs, I can plan where to put the C-channels. Wooden tabletops like this can warp and cup over time due to things like humidity. So to prevent this, I'm routing out a slot in the table and attaching steel C-channels with threaded inserts and bolts. I'm using a 1/4 inch straight bit and making a 1/2 inch deep plunge cut to fit the flanges of the C-channels, and route out the middle using a 3/4 inch bit, an 1/8 inch deep. I'm marking a slot in each of the boards, then drilling a hole for a threaded insert. I'm using a portable drill guide which ensures that the holes are perfectly vertical, and it has an adjustable depth stop so I'll never over drill. It's really great for anyone that doesn't have a drill press or projects that are just too big for one. I'm using an Allen wrench to drive a 5/16 inch threaded wood insert into each hole. I'm using 5/16 by 3/4 inch hex bolts and 1 1/4 inch washers to mount the C-channels. I do own an impact driver, but to avoid accidentally over torquing and pulling the threaded inserts out, I'm just using my ratchet. All right, I got the brackets all bolted up to the tabletop, so those are good to go. Now we're moving on to mounting the legs. Now they're gonna be mounted in a very similar way. So what I'm gonna be doing is a bolt and washer, but I'm gonna be drilling a hole with a shoulder into each of these, and I'll probably be doing about 4 bolts on each leg. Now, let's keep going. I have the dimensions for these hole positions in the plans. I'm using 3/8 by 3 inch hex bolts to mount the legs and drilling the shoulders a 1/2 inch deep, which will leave some extra thread in the insert to ensure the bolts can be good and tight. I'm using a 1 inch Forstner bit to drill the shoulder with my drill stop set at a 1/2 inch. Plus, this bit leaves an easy center for drilling the next hole all the way through. I'm using a 3/8 inch bit to drill the through hole, and remember, have a sacrificial board underneath so you don't end up with a brand new hole in your tabletop. This portable drill guide is worth its weight in gold during the whole process. It really makes this much easier. Alrighty, we've got a fully functional table and it is rock solid. Now we just have a few more things to do, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull these legs back off, do a final sanding on them to really smooth them out, and then paint them, put them back on here, do a final sanding on the top of this, poly it, and this thing will be good to go. So, let's keep going. Now I want these legs to look completely seamless, so I put some wood filler in to fill in all the cracks, sanded everything down to 220, and then finally broke all the edges for paint. I painted both the legs with 2 coats of Rust-Oleum matte black paint and primer spray paint. While the legs were drying, I moved on to the final sanding at 220 grit for the tabletop. To prep it for poly, I rubbed the entire surface with a wet cloth to raise the grain and sanded it smooth one final time. The only thing left was to break all the sharp edges with a sanding block. I'm applying 2 coats of crystal clear matte finish poly and performed a light sanding in between. I applied the same poly on the legs to help protect the paint from impacts. It looks horrible when you first apply it, but it looks great once it's dried. Once everything was dry, I reattached the legs. And with that, this table is done. All right, the dining table is done. It looks so good. I am really pleased with how it turned out, and I can't wait to have this thing in my house. Now, as always, if you enjoyed this video or found it helpful whatsoever, please hit the like button for me. It helps me out a ton, and I really appreciate it. And hit the subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all my future projects. And leave a comment. I read every single one of your guys' comments. They are all great, and I really do appreciate them a ton. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.